All right, let's get started here. This is sedate. If you intended to be someplace else, you're very welcome here. Let's see here. Suddenly, let me try this here.
You know, it's when you say you're about to start outside. Lovely. There's a lot of people outside.
That's all right.
Yeah?
They don't love us.
Okay, let's try this again. That looks good. Okay, the usual note well. It's small enough type that it'll be hard to read, but it's something that you probably are aware of from every other working group that you've been to, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. There are some basic meeting tips here. If this is your first time, there is in the IETF 115 agenda, there is a link to our working group, and it has on the right-hand side a link to the on-site tool. That's the one you should probably use. That also does the job of automatically signing the blue sheets for you. And we do have some remote participants, I see, so that's great. We'll make sure and keep an eye on the queue as we go along. In terms of resources for this IETF meeting, the agenda is on Data Tracker. Meet Echo, of course, is what you're using to participate. There is Zulip. We've sort of moved to Zulip as the instant messaging tool. And there's, of course, the chat room associated with Meet Echo, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. In terms of resources, here are the usual ones. Bron is going to start putting notes in the notepad. That's great. The mailing list is right there. Enough about that. Here's our agenda. This is the simplest agenda that we could possibly have. We're basically here to see whether or not we've made enough progress on the sedate draft. And Karsten will take us through that, and we'll see if there are any remaining outstanding issues. Otherwise, Bron and I be doing an assessment. We're supposed to do it tomorrow, as a matter of fact. If we need it, we can talk about the liaison that we have to TC154. I'm not sure we need that, but we can decide as we go along. And so with that, we come to the end of my prepared remarks. And we're going to give the presentation to Karsten. Let's see here. There. And I can run the slides for you, or?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
But can you use that thing?
Yeah, I think you might be able to use that.
But then you have to plug this into your laptop.
Oh, well, that's impossible, as it turns out.
Yeah, I cannot use this, so I'm going to do the same. Okay, thank you. So this is a pretty illustrious community today, but we will go on YouTube, so it's worth doing this. So this is really the only slide I need to show because we are pretty much done, and the document has converged. Surprisingly, we found a problem with the document that we were supposed to build on. We go into some more details and added a fix to that, to the document, even though we promised that we were not going to touch our base document. So that's really the interesting part today. And we also found out that it is really hard to discuss this problem. Next slide. So just to remind everyone what RFC 3339 is, This is essentially described by this data model here. An RFC-239 date has a UTC time and optionally a local offset. That's the whole data content of the thing. And well, that was defined around the year 2000, essentially as a profile of ISO 8601 that we all love dearly. So they used actually the 1988 version for that. One could argue that they didn't quite profile it right, but that's maybe not that important. There was a 2000 version of 8601, and that's even cited by 539. So let's think about that. So I'm noticing that when you look at the characters, you don't necessarily see a UTC time. So when there is a local offset, the UTC time is encoded based on that local offset. But the data model view of this data is that you always have a UTC time and you optionally have a local offset. So there are no floating times or anything like that, no calendaring times. This is just a timestamp on the UTC timescale, plus optionally the local offset hint. And the reason why that is given for using the local offset is that this is often useful information. So how do you indicate that you are not providing a local offset when you're generating an RFC-339 timestamp? You use -0 as your local offset. So that is going to be important in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So what SEDATE actually does is extending 339 timestamps. So you can add additional hints, just like the local offset hint is a hint. There are other hints. And in particular, there is a way to indicate the time zone. So the local offset only tells you how many hours you are west or east of UTC, while the time zone actually tells you which political construct you are referencing to arrive at that local offset. So for instance, Europe Berlin right now is +1, but in summer it's +2. So the time zone information is a hint that is added, but it doesn't change the content, which is still a UTC timestamp. We also have ways to add keys for other options. And as an example, we put in the calendar type, which again is a hint and not changing the base semantics of the timestamp. And we can even identify options as critical, as must understand. We don't have an example for that in the document right now, but that's easy to see how that would work. Okay, so this is all really not very complicated. It's not rocket science. And our main job was to make sure that this works well with various existing and in standardization interfaces to timestamp libraries that we want to make sure people can continue to use. Next slide. So yeah, this should be my last slide. Unfortunately, next slide. That's not quite as simple. Next slide. So the problem is that RFC 539 defines the ISO 8601Z suffix and the +00:00 as synonyms for a local offset hint of 0 minutes. So you are on UTC, but you are not only on UTC. This is you're telling the recipient that, for instance, the person who generated this timestamp actually uses the local offset to convert the UTC time into their local thinking. And to opt out of giving that information, again, we have -00:00. That means no local offset given. And this -00:00 was essentially imported from RFC 822, or actually 2822, which is the first version of the email standards that actually documents this. So an email date may contain this -00:00. And that is actually in use. It's not like 30% of the mails also have that. I did a quick check on a small repository of emails, a million or so I had, and I found like 0.3%. I don't remember the number, but it was not nothing, but it also wasn't an overwhelming majority of emails using that. But at least it's in use, so it's good that email has that. So people can, for instance, indicate that this email originated from a place that simply has no idea what the user who was ultimately responsible for the email being generated uses as their local offset. Now, the RFC 3339 implementations actually generally don't deal with -00:00. Some of them actually follow the words of ISO 8601 and don't allow that. That is actually rare, but most never generate this, because 8601 in its 2000 version, not in its 1988 version, but in its 2000 version, suddenly started to disallow -00:00. So since people who write JavaScript implementations or other programming language implementations often look at ISO standards in parallel to the profiles we generate here, they decided not to write that number. So in practice, they wouldn't have a way to actually indicate no local offset being given. But the reality is that all implementations that don't deal in time zone offsets, so would really have to use this -00:00, all those implementations use Z as the suffix, because that's short. And other implementations that actually do have the information have tended to give Z as the indication that no local offset has been given, and +00:00 as the local offset 0. So we have an interoperability problem between implementations that implement 3339 and implementations that implement what other implementations implement, what the majority of implementations out there implement. So this is based on a survey that Justin Grant did, and which can be found in one of the issues of the SEDATE repository. So next slide. What do we do about that? Well, there is the whole issue of handling conflicts, for instance, between time zone information and information that is in the original RFC 3339. I think we have that correctly covered, so we know how to handle that, except for the problem on the previous slide. Next slide. And the result, that didn't take. Oh, the result is that we essentially now have two options. We can ignore the problem, feign ignorance, and just add our optional suffixes and act as if nothing were amiss or something like that. Or we can do the right thing. And the discussion on the list went into preferably doing the right thing. Next slide. And the radical proposal is that we actually start to interpret Z as minus 0000. So Z means no local offset is implied. So if you want to imply a local offset of British winter time, then you write plus 00:00. So this happens to mirror the consensus in the implementations. So this would essentially just be adjusting the specification to what the implementations do. But it goes outside the charter of SEDATE because we were not supposed to actually modify 539. So we thought maybe we need a little bit of discussion beyond the SEDATE working group. Next slide. So I sent an email about a month ago to 5 working groups. Or actually, ART is not a working group. ART is the discussion list of the area to which SEDATE belongs in the IETF, applications and real time. And the 4 working groups, SEDATE, CBOR, NTP, and TikTok. Now, the reason that CBOR, NTP, and TikTok are on there is that they are also doing something with time, and they probably need to know what's going on. Now, TikTok is kind of closing right now, so this maybe wasn't that necessary. NTP is in the process of essentially making up their mind of what should be in NTP version 5. And there is actually some discussion about having a time zone aware version of NTP. NTP normally is just about UTC, so they wouldn't care. But that may influence their discussion, so I thought it might be good to include them. CBOR has a time tag, which is a binary data structure that is supposed to be compatible with other representations of time. So of course, it should provide a binary version of the SEDATE extensions, which it does. And of course, SEDATE, because we detected the problem. Next slide. Now, it turns out when you bring up this problem, then people start, first of all, discussing whether we should be referencing ISO 8601 at all, which is not relevant to this working group because that was a decision done by 539. But still, there was a lot of discussion in the thread about whether we should reference non-free standards normatively. Okay, irrelevant. There also was a discussion about the need for floating times. So floating times are different from the Z times that I have been talking about. These are times where you don't know what the local offset is, but also don't know how the time you're looking at relates to UTC. So the only thing in a floating time is, you know, it's 1400 afternoon, but you don't know what that means in UTC. And that's strictly outside of the scope of this working group because we started with the UTC time representation for 539. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion, but maybe not that relevant. There also was a discussion about sub-minute time zone offset. So the Netherlands in 1923 had a time zone offset from Germany that was something plus 23 seconds. Yeah, that's certainly interesting, but it's not something that really impacts date and time implementations that we use today. So nobody has sub-minute time zone offsets in use for things that happen to matter for commerce. So we can ignore that as well. Then people brought up calendaring issues. What if I if I plan a meeting next year in the summer and say, well, it's supposed to be 1400 afternoon. And then my government goes ahead and finally implements the decision to get rid of daylight savings time or summertime, yeah, then what happens to my meeting? The UTC timestamp I may have computed for that meeting is no longer going to be right. So RFC 539 really wasn't the right standard to represent that in any case. So this is about calendaring times and not about time stamping information in a way that is unambiguously referenced to UTC. So again, relevant. And of course, you can then from there go into tangents on unstable politicians and time zone definitions. And yes, that has happened in this thread. So after reading the whole thread, I'm none the wiser, except maybe the fact that these 5 things came up and not really criticism of making the change or making the change that we are intending to make here shows me that this isn't really a big problem, apparently. So next slide. So my recommendation would be to consider the discussion done at this point. Check with the area director and with the ASG in general whether we can go beyond our charter, which probably means we will have to change our charter, to actually fix RFC 539 in this context, which, by the way, I think is a useful outcome. So aligning our documentation of how a timestamp implementation should work with what people are actually doing out there is a useful thing to do, completely independent of our charter of adding additional hints to these timestamps. So this is where we are. And I was hoping to actually use the time here to get at least an in-room conclusion of this. Again, we have to verify anything on the mailing lists that we do in the IETF, and we have to talk with the AD. I don't think there is an AD in the room.
There's an AD online.
Oh, good. So let's open the discussion. Neutral.
Go ahead, Ujjwal. All right, you seem to be on mute here.
It doesn't seem to have sound switched on.
Yeah. Ujjwal, can you turn your audio on?
Hello, does that work?
Hello.
Oh,
Yes.
excellent.
Well, I hate technology. Okay. Well, apologies. I had one question, maybe not just for Karsten, but for the entire room. When we were starting out with this work, sort of pre-sedate chartering and everything, there were ambitions initially to sort of revamp 3339, right? There were a few other things like uh, extended years and so on that could be done back then. Uh, all of those faced a lot of resistance, and in the end, we decided to go with this sort of more conservative approach of leaving 339 as is. What I'm trying to say here is that while I'm completely with you that sorry, that the charter sort of restricts us, I do have to remind that there is a reason why the charter is explicit on this thing. So if we decide to sort of recharter today and move ahead with this, I hope that we can reach a conclusion as a working group that the change we're talking about here does warrant sort of that change, and that we wouldn't receive further pushback. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, I think I understand that Francesca's in the queue. Go ahead, Francesca.
Let's see if this works.
It does
Can you
work.
hear- Okay, great. Yes, I was going to say what Udwal just said. That this. Sorry, 1 second.
That's our youngest engineer.
Hello. Let's try again. Sorry about that. As you can hear, I'm not alone. I was going to say that yes, this charter was crafted with a lot of attention, and it was a very it was a compromise to get to this text. So any modification to this charter will require a lot of work to get consensus from the community. And while I understand that fixing things is it's obviously very appealing, but we need to have a community consensus that agreement on what we're fixing and the scope and the use case and everything. So it's not as simple as saying let's extend the charter and get this done. And I see 17 people in the meeting today. I know that this meeting collided with MediaMan, and so I think that a big part of the resistance that was there during the initial charter discussion, people are not present right now. So I'm just catching up with the thread. I don't know if this was discussed in the mailing list, but I think that we should have a consensus to do any sort of rechartering. And then if there is consensus, of course, I will support it and bring it to the ASG and move forward with it. But the first thing is, getting consensus in the community.
Yeah, can I quickly reply to that?
Okay, sure.
So the purpose of the October 4th mail was to find out whether there would be such resistance. Of course, I don't know that everybody who would be resisting this is on the art mailing list or actually reads this or actually replies to what they read. So this is hard to assess, but I was surprised that there was no discussion that really questioned what we were trying to do. There were some misunderstandings of what we were trying to do, so I think these were corrected. But once they were, I think, yeah, people just went off on those 5 tangents that I listed. So my assessment is that we don't have strong opposition against that. But yeah, I'm not in the pay grade to actually make this assessment.
Before I call on Brian here, let me as chair say that I think we need to be very clear that we're talking about 2 things, right? We have an existing sedate document that the working group has, and that's currently in last call. And then there is this problem, which certainly the working group could document.
Document in the current.
Yep, right. And use that documentation as a mechanism to support the AD as a background to rechartering. So I guess what I'm thinking here is that the working group has 2 tasks in front of it. Excuse me. Number 1, decision about the existing document, and number 2, a revision 3339 bis or whatever we want to call that. So Brian, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay, thank you. My memory of the discussion to start off with about changing RFC 3339 was that people didn't want anything which would make the wire format backwards incompatible in any way. That was the concern. If we did something that meant that existing parsers broke. The nice thing about this change is all we are doing is saying you must not generate one particular form. So we're not adding anything that will break existing parsers. I think that's why there hasn't been any pushback. My suggestion, without any chair hats on, is that this document we publish saying must not generate that particular form, and that we've identified this problem with RSA 3339, and then ignore that for this document. We publish this document, and then we ask to recharter with a specific task of just fixing that one thing with 3339 and nothing else. I think there will be no difficulty getting consensus on that change.
Thanks, Brian. I wonder, if, not to put you on the spot, Francesca, but do you have any reaction to that as a path forward? It was rude of me to put you on the spot.
She just may have noise issues locally.
So I can press the button there, but put me in the queue after that.
We don't hear you, Francesca.
Yeah, we still can't hear you.
Let's see now.
That's fine. Yep.
Great. So yeah, my preference would also be to finish the current work and then focus on possible rechartering. But yeah, again, I'm still catching up, so my opinion might change after looking into the details of the mail thread. And yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I should remind people that the actual approach that is in the current document is not to do a 3339 bis. I don't see a reason to do that, but to actually just provide an update to 3339. So the RFC resulting from this process would have a tag on it, which says it updates 3339. And the metadata for 3339 would say this is updated by the current document. And the only update here would be juggling these three time zone, local offset hints Z +0 and -0. So I know that we have an urgent problem in our hands that in about 8,000 years, this will no longer work. But maybe we have a little bit more time to fix that part. And the intention here was to make sure that we have a common format for libraries like temporal and the JavaScript support that is being put in by ECMA TC39 and so on, that provides a common basis for the syntax extension that people need.
Okay, well, with a lot of people who are participating remotely, let me take a moment here and see if there are any other comments.
One thing is that if you do go ahead and fix RFC 3339 to take the terminology that Carsten is using, we should probably think about liaise with ISO as well.
We have our
Has
ISO
this
here.
been discussed, or-
If you want to hop in, Mike.
Yeah, and we also should talk to other people like ECMA TC39. We currently have informal contacts into that organization. That's really the reason why we have even detected this problem, because we have exercised these informal contacts.
Yeah, I mean the ISO committee is sort of wrapping up. I mean, I got into it fairly late. They'd already almost finished. There's a couple of points that I was going to raise about their last-minute decisions, but if we put together a message, I can always pass it across and see what happens.
Yeah, and I maybe also should point out that what we are fixing here is not things that we have imported from 8601, but what we're fixing is our own interpretation of there being a difference between two representations that mean the same thing in 8601 and adding a third one that is not supported by 8601. So from the point of view of TC154, we are getting more compliance, which probably they should be like.
Yeah, I don't know that it's something that affects 8601.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Let me sum up what I think I've heard. This is dangerous. I think first of all, the existing sedate document is in last call. That last call ends tomorrow. I haven't heard at our meeting today any objections to moving that document forward. And so I'm going to just stop for a moment and listen if there are any last minute objections. Okay, that part's good. The second thing I've heard is that perhaps, and this is my interpretation of what I've heard, the chair should work with the AD, the responsible AD, to start the discussion about a very conservative rechartering for sedate to take care of the problem in 3339, emphasizing what the cause of the problem is, what the solution to the problem proposed is, what the use cases are, and basically maybe even go to the list with proposed charter text. So that's the second thing I've heard. The third thing I've heard is that if we do that, we should communicate to ISO that, number one, we found the problem. It's it's a problem that's associated with us. It's not our interpretation of the ISO standard. But we should, in the spirit of liaising with other standards organizations, we should communicate that to them. Those are the three things I've heard. Have I missed anything? Karsten is nodding his head. Okay. I feel like we have consensus. All right. So what you can expect next is the working group last call ends tomorrow. And at that point, the chairs will have a conversation. The second thing is that the chairs will have a conversation with Francesca to talk about the process of extending or changing the charter in this conservative way. And then we can start the work on moving that forward this winter, long before we go to Japan. That's what I'd like to do, is that if we are going to pursue revising the charter, I'd like to have that process underway before Yokohama. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, I've got nods of heads in the room, and I hear no objections from the people participating remotely. Let me just check the chat to make sure that I'm not. Okay. All right. Thank you, Karsten. I appreciate it. The chairs appreciate it. I believe we're done here.
I think so. Just check for other business.
All right, let me check with the remote participants and the people in the room. Is there any other business for sedate for today? Going once, going twice. Thank you. And look for us on the mailing list. You should see, perhaps still this week, some correspondence from the chairs to the mailing list. And once again, thanks to all the people who participated, both remotely and in the room. This session is closed.
Cool. Thanks for attending remotely, Francesca, and being back. Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you, and sorry about the screams. Leonardo wanted to participate as well.
Oh, good.
It's not a problem. Okay. you're here all week?
Yes.
Okay.
Where are we?
Great. I'll buy you a beer somewhere.
Sounds great. We've got the Friends of Email dinner on Thursday night if you want to join a bunch of email people.
Oh, I would, but I've got another bunch of people who have spoken for me.
All good. Check in on that. I might send a last call for people to sign up.
All right, IAB Open is next.
Yeah. Lots of this room. Yeah.